Today I'm here to show you how to paint colorful whites by focusing on shapes, contrast, and light. The inspiration for this painting is this lovely cherry blossom image by Annette Meyer, and it can be found at Pixabay. The reason I say inspiration is because the first thing that I've done is create a 5-value sketch. I'm simplifying this almost to the point of being an abstract, and this value painting will help to see what's going on within the blossom, and it also is going to be used to match colors so that we'll know what colors to use. To put it simply, I've taken the same values that I had in the painting and put them on the left, and then I've taken some colors that are of what I consider a matching value and put them down here so I can see what colors would work in what parts of the painting. There's further explanation of this in the full review at Doodle Wash. My primary sketch is almost non-existent, mainly to make sure that I fit within the confines of the paper, and so that I can kind of see where my 3 blossoms are. I've punched up the value on this so you can actually see the pencil lines, but it was sketched to the point where I could barely see it myself. I want the focus of this tutorial to be on capturing the colors in the white, not on how to draw a cherry blossom or a whole lot about other techniques. Now to the painting. I'm mixing up paint to about the consistency of thin milk, sort of a 1% milk. And I'm going to start with the Aquifying Curlium. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's actually like a cerulean blue. I'm going to use this Squirrel brush, mainly because it's a very soft brush. It holds tons of water and color. Just barely tapping the paper to get that on there. And even at that, it's a little bit darker than what I really want, but I'll just get more water on the brush. And this will actually dry lighter than it looks here, but it's going to take it a while to dry. And I'm painting this center section. I mentioned earlier that this is sort of abstract. I'm using that beautiful cherry blossom photo as a guide, not an absolute reference. The idea that I want to give you is using the shapes and contrast, and I'll get into the edges, but I'm not worried about detail. When this is done, it may not look like a cherry blossom, but I want it to really be colorful and give this real impression of light. There's not too much in this flower over here. It's mostly in shades, so it's going to be a darker value here. I'll be using pretty much the same colors, but they will be a thicker wash so that it gives me a darker value. Now I'm going to drop in some lemon yellow of the same consistency, thin milk. I'm going to drop it in and cover that entire area and just kind of let it expand into the blue. It's going to create some soft edges, maybe even some lost and found edges. Then I'm going to drop in a little bit of permanent rose. Now I'm putting this in the areas that are the shadow. In real life, what that is the shadow of leaves that are behind, petals I should say, and some leaves that are behind this particular part of the blossom. And you really don't see this pink, it's more of a purple color, or a kind of a slate gray, but I want this to be colorful, so I am using artistic license, and I'm going to add some pink in here. A lot of artistic license on this. That's one of the nice things about abstract. You can say, hey, it's abstract, it's anything I want it to be. And this, yeah, that had dried pretty much there. So I'm going to get this even more wet. And I'm not too worried if you get that backsplash blossom, sort of a splotchy effect. I'm not going to worry about. I don't think I'll get it, but if I do, I'm not going to worry about it. This is a no worry design. I'm tilting so the colors will kind of get a lost and found edge feeling, and so that I don't get too dark a blue up there where that water was pooling. Other thing, I'm going to put a little bit more of the red in here. For one, now that I've got that yellow, it's going to be a little bit more of a neutral color in here. Since that's the center and it's the furthest in, I want it to be a little bit darker. Yes, darker in value, which I'll darken it up again a little bit later, but also in the chroma itself, I want it to be more dull than the surrounding colors. Okay, now let's go ahead and down here. Now you see that has actually created a more of a slate gray that's a little bit lighter than I want there. So I'm going to get some of that Curlium. Now I'm using paint the consistency of whole milk. Now I'm using a little bit more color here than up here. I'm just alternating between the three colors I've been using: lemon yellow, Curlium blue, and permanent rose. Drop a little here, add a little there. Where I mix all three, I'm getting that more dull color that indicates that there's a little bit of shading in there. Okay, at this point, I'm going to let this dry, and so that when I start adding some of the other colors, they aren't bleeding. I want to have a separation now between this and the next set of colors that I'm going to add. Now that my interior shapes have dried, I'm ready to start the background, and I'm going to leave the white of the paper to finish off the petals, and by putting in the darks I'll be able to see exactly what I have for the petals themselves. I'll start with a little bit of lemon yellow. Now I'm mixing up my paint so it's more of a thin cream than whole milk. Maybe something like you'd pour into your coffee. Be sure to leave white between the yellow and the blue. That's the important part for contrast and for that feeling of light. And we'll put some more of the yellow here. We've got light, it's like it's shining all the way through. I'm using permanent mauve for the center. Now I'm switching to leaf green, and I'm just kind of carving out some general leaf-like shapes. I really don't want this to be the focus. I want to imply that there's foliage, but I don't want a whole lot of detail. Truthfully, even though I have my sketch and I've got the original image up where I can look at them for inspiration as I go, I'm kind of doing this out of my head now. If you've done all the exercises that the charts and creating a value sketch and all of that, you kind of have a feel by now for the way the flowers are going. And as I said in the beginning, what's important is the light. So the less I keep looking at the original photo, the less I'm inclined to go, oh, I need to put in this bit of detail or that bit of detail. I've switched to a smaller, stiffer brush. This is actually going to be a fairly thick mix of the Hooker Green Dark. Get her in there and just let it create some lost and found edges. See, my yellow had already dried a little bit there, so it's creating more of a soft edge here where there's a little bit of overlap of color in there. It's not a real hard edge. And then we're getting off into some kind of more lost and found edges. Now, where I didn't have any white before, this is a hard edge. And for this section right up in here and around here in this flower here, I want hard edges because that contrast is going to give the feeling of white that we want, that light, white light. Okay, now I'm switching over from the hookers to permanent mauve, which is my darkest. I didn't want to do that. I've got the dreaded drop of paint that I didn't want, and it's in permanent mauve, a very nice staining color. I won't be able to remove it entirely, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is, while it's still wet, I'm going to take a tissue and dab at it, and then I'm going to take a damp brush and dab at that, and just repeat this until I've lightened it as much as I feel I can. Now I'll take a damp brush, no paint, just water, and kind of soften the edges and move some of that color down. I would have been darkening this area anyway. Now I'm going to let that area I've been working on dry a little bit and start adding some permanent mauve up at the top. Again, you got to be sure you leave white. I've been known to kind of forget that, and then it ruins the whole effect. So it's very important to do that. I'm going to be alternating the permanent mauve and the Hooker's Green Dark, just sort of almost at random. You can look at the reference photo if you want to get an idea for some of the places to change. But the two are pretty much the same value. I'm going to also, in some places, I'll let the colors run together, and others I'll have a distinct hard edge. I'm going to do a little bit of negative painting to create some more leaf shapes. Again, it's all sort of at random. I don't want any real specific detail. Mostly I want those shapes and the alternation of color and the different types of edges. There's a sort of bokeh effect, that unfocused light where you seem to have like little spots of light in the background. I like that. It is a detail, but it's an unfocused one, and it adds some great interest. So I'm going to do that. You can see I've got the lighter color, and then I go, it was like a leaf green, some yellow, the dark hooker's green, and now I'm putting permanent mauve around it. And later I'll go in like I did with my big purple splotch and add some water and kind of soften all of that. It's not something you have to do, but it is a nice effect. I continue alternating the permanent mauve and hooker's green dark until I've pretty much filled in all the background, and then I let it dry. While it's drying, I look at it and try to decide at this point, what more do I need to do? It's pretty close to being done. I'm going to add some of the Curlium blue to separate the blossoms a little bit. I'm not going to get too solid with it, because I don't want like just a line bisecting the two flowers, just enough so that you can register that there is a difference between the bottom blossom and the one in the center. I'm going to take some titanium white, a thick cream mix, and dab it over that area where I had dropped the purple paint earlier. I've removed as much as I can of that staining color. Now, there is a tradition in watercolor of not using white, just relying on the white of the paper. And there are some techniques where that's absolutely the way it should be. You shouldn't use white at all, because white does make it more opaque. But it's still fairly transparent. Some of the color is going to show through, and the amount that I'm using here, unless somebody's really, really holding it to the light and looking for it, they're not going to notice the white. So, you know, if you're somebody that really wants to stay with that traditional sort of watercolor, you'll have to live with the purple blotch. I'm also going to brush a little bit of the white on areas where the paint had pooled a little bit and created a bit of a darker line, and just kind of dry brushing the white on in a few places to break up that line. It gives it more of a blended look, which is what I'm the soft edge rather than the hard edge. My camera shut off and I didn't realize it, but if you'll look over to the bottom petal there on the right bottom, the top of it, I also added a thick layer of the white so that I have a little bit of the petal curving over. I mentioned the bokeh effect earlier, and what I'm doing now is taking a damp brush, just water, no paint, and I'm sort of running it around the areas that I want to blend and pulling the color a little. Sometimes I pull the green into the purple and sometimes the purple into the green. I'll do the same thing with the yellow, kind of pulling yellow into green and green into yellow. I want to get a really soft blend of the colors. Then I'm going back over to the other side, and I'm feeling that yellow, I want that sense of light, but that yellow is taking away too much attention from the white of the petals. So I'm going to dull it down a little bit. I'm still just using water, and it's just a damp brush. It's not like sopping wet. And I'll put it into the yellow and pull up a little, or excuse me, the purple, and pull a little that up and dull the yellowish color that's there. I've gone in the center now, just using picked up paint and defined the center a little bit. At this point, most of what I'm doing is just picking up paint from one area and pulling it into another area to blend things and give it a softer edge. It's not going to be a lost and found, it's going to be more of a soft edge. If you're painting this yourself, you're going to have to actually make some decisions, because your painting will come out a little different from mine depending on paper you're using, what consistency of paint, the brand of paint you're using. There's a lot of things that will make a difference. You need to look at your painting, decide what you want. In this case, I wanted to dull down the bright areas in the background, and I wanted to bring out the center of the middle flower. So that's what I'm working on now. And now I'm going to go down here to this bottom blossom, and I'm going to add some shadows into the edge of the flower. Now when I drew those, I think it isn't that the pistil of the flower, I got the lines a little too thick. So I will use those to add a lot of color, not a huge amount, but to add some shading into that particular center of the blossom. You might not need to do this at all. It just depends on what you've already painted. Now I'm going to do the same thing down below. I've still just got water, a damp brush. I want to make the edges around the blossoms harder, so that we have a definite difference between what's in the background and what's with the blossoms. I'm dulling down the bright colors in the background. I will leave a little bit. I mean, I really still want to keep that feeling of light shining through, but I don't want it to take away from the whites of the blossoms. I want that white to just smack you right in the face. I'm still just using a damp brush, and watch what you're doing. If it looks like the color is getting too muddy, there are two possibilities. Your brush is too wet and you're pulling too much color, really blending things too much. Or it could be that the red, yellow, and blues that you have don't work well together. In that case, just stop. If your colors aren't working well, blending it this way, it's better to just leave it, even though it isn't exactly what you want, and know for next time that you want to spend some time playing with the three main colors and making sure that even when you mix all three together, the color isn't too ugly. I don't want to fuss too much more at this point, but I do want to bring out the center, deepen a little bit of that shadow in the center there. Now I'm going to add a last little bit of detail with the permanent mauve. I'm not going to overdo it, but that will draw the eye because there's a lot of contrast there. The lines down here are still too thick and I need more shadowing anyway, so I'm back to a damp brush and I'm just pulling out some of that purple, the permanent mauve, to create shadow. I'm pulling some of the permanent mauve and creating shadow under the area where I painted white to increase the feeling of the fold. I'm going to add just a little bit more shadow over here on the left. That's pretty bland there and doesn't really give the feeling of it being a blossom, so this will give a little separation, a little bit of interest, but I'm keeping it pretty soft. And that's it. Now, from the scan version, you can see that all this was much brighter than it looked from the video. You're interested in learning more about the way that I chose my colors based on the values and on the idea of the hard, soft, and lost and found edges, please visit doodlewash.com. There's a link down below in the description that will take you to the full review. I hope you've enjoyed this video.